In 1861, Canon George Ogilvie, the newly appointed headmaster of the Diocesan College in Cape Town, introduced the sport of Winchester College football, which is a sport similar to rugby union, and to this date it's referred to as the introduction of rugby in South Africa. However, in 1875, rugby football was fully introduced to the Cape Colony, with the first club being founded that same year, the Hamilton Rugby Football Club, by a member of the club of the same name in Hamilton, Scotland. Sometime between 1875 and 1883, rugby union was introduced to the Cape Colony by British colonialist miners hailing from Cornwall. It would be in 1883 that the first rugby union club would be founded, the Stellenbosch, and would be played by Boer farmers. As Boer British miners and farmers started migrating away from the South African coast along the gold and diamond routes, rugby union would be spread throughout the Eastern Cape and Natal provinces and would reach Johannesburg and Kimberley. Rugby union proved to be so successful in fact that in the same year as the first club was founded, the first provincial team would also be founded, the Western Province Rugby Football Union. And in the next 6 years, three other provincial teams would be formed, which would lead to the creation of the South African Rugby Board in 1889, based in Kimberley, and in the same year the first nationwide tournament was held, which Western Province Rugby Football Union won. These advances in the popularity of rugby union in South Africa would culminate in the British Isles Tour of South Africa in 1891, which would mark the founding of the Springboks, the South African national rugby team. This tour and the founding of the Springboks would mark the start of official segregation within rugby union in South Africa. The first coloured-only rugby club was most likely established in 1887, however sources on this are sparse, and the dates can vary a lot. Rugby union would grow popular within the non-white community of South Africa, leading to the establishment of the South African Coloured Rugby Football Board in 1897. From the introduction of rugby union in South Africa until 1948, whites and coloured were socially forbidden to play together, as they had different organising bodies and clubs. However, in 1948, the apartheid would officially begin with the election of D.F. Malan to the presidency. However, even before the election of the apartheid government to power in South Africa, foreign rugby teams had felt it necessary to exclude non-white players from their national teams, most notably teams from New Zealand, which comprised of many Maori players, leading to the dropping of Randy Wilson from the All Blacks team in 1919, a player of Indian origin, and George Napier, arguably the greatest Maori player of all time, and Jimmy Mill from the All Blacks in 1928. By 1960, the apartheid system in South Africa started being frowned upon internationally, most notably thanks to British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's speech, The Wind of Change, denouncing colonialism, and the Sharpeville massacre that would occur a month later, where 69 people were murdered by the South African police, of which 29 were children, for peacefully protesting the passing of anti-black laws. In 1970, however, perhaps in a move to promote international rugby and portray South Africa as less racist, New Zealand and Maoris were considered honorary whites and were thus allowed to play in South Africa. This would lead to the All Blacks tour of South Africa in 1976, a controversial tour which would start shortly after the Soweto riots, where 20,000 black students protested against the introduction of Afrikaans in college school curriculums, of which between 176 and 700 children were killed by the South African police. This tour would be internationally condemned, and 28 countries would boycott the 1976 Summer Olympics as a result of this tour. The international contempt of South Africa would lead to the signing of the 1977 Gleneagles Agreement, an agreement in which Commonwealth countries would refuse to take part in any sporting contact with South Africa. Controversially, in 1980, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher opposed this agreement and helped orchestrate the 1980 British Lions tour to South Africa, which would later be followed by another tour by France that same year, and one by Ireland the year after. International contempt towards South Africa was not only held by Western countries, however, as the Soviet Union refused to attend the 1987 inaugural World Cup, as they believed that South Africa would attend, however, they would later not be invited. Rugby union had long been used as a form of white supremacy within South Africa. This meant that when the inevitable fall of the apartheid government occurred in 1994, the South African Rugby Board were desperate to repair their public image. As the next Rugby World Cup was to be held in 1995, the SARB and newly elected President Nelson Mandela agreed that it would be a good step towards reconciliation between whites and blacks in South Africa. During what many people have come to call the most rigged Rugby World Cup ever, up until the one held in 2023, South Africa won the tournament, beating New Zealand 15-12, with about two-thirds of all blacks being poisoned, and thus severely ill and unfit to play. However, South Africa winning the World Cup was a great morale boost for all South Africans. Francois Pienaar, the captain of the Springboks, dedicated his performance and the team's victory to all 43 million South Africans, acknowledging all peoples living in South Africa. Nelson Mandela would be the one to present Pienaar with a Webb Ellis Trophy, wearing the latter's jersey. This apparent love for rugby won over the hearts of millions of white South Africans, boosting support for the ANC government. Rugby union had long been used as a form of white supremacy within South Africa. This meant that when the inevitable fall of the apartheid government occurred in 1994, the South African Rugby Board were desperate to repair their public image. As the next Rugby World Cup was to be held in 1995, the SARB and newly elected President Nelson Mandela agreed that it would be a good step towards reconciliation between whites and blacks in South Africa. During what many people have come to call the most rigged Rugby World Cup ever, up until the one held in 2023, South Africa won the tournament, beating New Zealand 15-12, with about two-thirds of all blacks being poisoned, and thus severely ill and unfit to play. However, South Africa winning the World Cup was a great morale boost for all South Africans. Francois Pienaar, the captain of the Springboks, dedicated his. However, South Africa winning the World Cup was a great morale boost for all South Africans. Francois Pienaar, the captain the captain of the Springboks, dedicated his performance and the team's victory to all 43 million South Africans, acknowledging all peoples living in South Africa. Nelson Mandela would be the one to present Pienaar with a Webb Ellis Trophy, wearing the latter's jersey. This apparent love for rugby won over the hearts of millions of white South Africans, boosting support for the ANC government. The events of this World Cup can also be seen in the film Invictus.